Okay, one last time. This week we look at one of the greatest statements of the life of faith, a statement that has inspired countless believers throughout the ages. It's in verse 10 of Hebrews chapter 11. It tells us what kept Abraham going throughout all those long years of trial. He was looking forward, it tells us, to a city with foundations whose architect and builder is God. Now, I sometimes think that it's very easy for us, with what C.S. Lewis used to call chronological snobbery, to think that, well, things were just so much simpler in the old days. It was easier to have faith. Life was simpler. And so we relegate people like Abraham to the kind of kindergarten of faith. Oh, it's hard for us, it was easy for them. After all, we tell ourselves, he didn't need to deal with all of the complexities of the modern world, from nuclear physics to having to get the kids to soccer practice on time. Well, no, he didn't. But he did have to scrape a living from the land, and he did have to feed and care for his family from very scarce resources indeed, and he had to keep on doing that day after day after day. So maybe when you think about it, we're the naive ones. We're the ones who have it easy. Perhaps it was harder for Abraham to have faith. Can you imagine Abraham looking out from under the flaps of his tent across to one of the cities of Canaan, perhaps Jericho or somewhere like that, longing for the security and for the comfort that he must have imagined went on behind those walls? And frankly, who wouldn't? But the Bible tells us that Abraham actually looked beyond the Jerichos, the cities of Canaan, and he looked beyond the earthly city to a heavenly one. He lifted his eyes up to better, to more distant things. And he saw a city that was surpassing anything that had been built with human hands. He saw a city with foundations built not by Canaanite kings, but by the Lord of all. Now there's a comparison in the text between three very distinct places, and you can see it if you look carefully. First of all, there's the tent, probably made from animal skins, in which Abraham himself dwelt, a home without any foundation whatsoever. And then there would be those cities, the Jericho of the text, a place with earthly foundations. And finally, there would be the city which is to come, the city of God, with eternal foundations. Abraham longed for the foundations, for the security that they gave, but he chose the eternal foundations instead of the ones that so easily pass away. There's actually another comparison that's implied within the text as well. It's between the buildings, not just between the foundations. You see, Abraham's tents were temporary. They were built to move. They weren't built to last. And the contemporary buildings around him, well, they must have seemed almost palatial to him at the sight of what he had. But these themselves were as nothing compared to the city of God, of which he is the architect and the builder, a city of speechless beauty and infinite majesty. Abraham looked to what is to come. He wasn't content with the second-rate offerings of this world. He sacrificed temporary riches for an eternal inheritance. And we're called to do the same. His heart was in the city which is to come. His eyes were not fixed on the tattered remnants of this world. He placed his hope not in the temporal, but in the eternal, not in human toys, but in lasting treasure. So, Abraham endured by applying what we call an eternal perspective to his suffering. And that can be very helpful for us today. He could have been bent out of shape. He could have been discouraged by the things that he saw happening around him. But no, he chose to consider his present in light of his future. And that is how his faith was sustained even during times of trial. He forsook present glory for the future glory that is God's promise. And you know, that's quite a contrast to the way that our world usually deals with things nowadays. Our world fixates on the immediate instead of looking to the eternal. But by faith, we look to a future that will be so much better than today. This is the eternal perspective. Now, I wonder if you've read John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress. I remember reading it when I was a teenager. It was quite a while ago now. Bunyan's main hero is a man called Christian, and he leaves his home And like Abraham, he feels this call and he starts out on his way to the eternal city. And along the way, as you may remember, he encounters all kinds of hardships. He manages to wander off and get lost. He's tempted along the way. He grows weary. He's almost driven back by some rather nasty lions that he encounters along the way. And then Christian arrives at a place called House Beautiful. And it's described as a way station where he can rest, where he can be served, and where he can be equipped for whatever lies ahead. And as he's getting ready to leave House Beautiful, he's advised to climb the Delectable Mountains nearby. And the reason is that because when he reaches the summit of those mountains, he'll be able to see his destination, which is the celestial city. And he'll be given hope because he's seen what lies in his future. And so he does. He climbs the Delectable Mountains, and the vision does give strength to his tired limbs and resolve to his heart. Now, there were many more dangers that lay ahead, spiritual warfare and persecution and trials of various kinds. And yet that vision encouraged him to the end. And that, in a way, is how Abraham lived by faith in a land that was not his own. And that is how we can live by faith as well. Abraham fixed his eyes on the prize, looking for the city whose architect and builder is God. Now, we've learned a great deal over the last couple of years about architects and builders. We've worked hard, haven't we, to provide some excellent facilities, some great tools for ministry. But they are not ends in themselves. They just point beyond themselves to the city of God. You see, in the end, we're not building something with studs and sheetrock. We're building with souls. And when these walls round about us have crumbled into dust, the city of God will still stand. And that's the city to which we belong if we have trusted in Christ. And that is where Christ leads us, by faith, to the celestial city. This is the inheritance that we shall receive after a life begun in faith, responding to God's call. A life pursued in respect to God's promises, and a life sustained by the vision of God's city, which is yet to come. May that vision sustain you.